Well, we have a lot to do today as we look at chapter 4. Israel becomes a people. It's a massive amount of material, and I know that you can't hope to read through the complete biblical text of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy in just the space of a few days. But you should at least look into the Old Testament to see some of the pertinent texts along the way. I suggest reading the first 3 or 4 chapters of Exodus, at least, um, say the 16th chapter of Leviticus. Um, there in Numbers, you might want to look in chapter 1 and chapter 26 to see both of the census uh, comments, and then in Deuteronomy, of course, see the farewell of Moses there in chapter 34. It's a huge amount of material. Do the best you can to look through some of the passages. You can also read the notes which I have posted. You should read the notes which I have posted. They're part of your reading assignment along with your textbook and this lecture. As a matter of fact, I'm going to try to take you through um, the textbook, and I'll throw in a few other things along the way in about the next 10 to 15 minutes. All right, let's jump in and begin. Without a doubt, the most dominating figure of this section is the man Moses. Moses, we talked about earlier, um, the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch, which is not assumed by the authors of this textbook, nor by many who are source critics and follow the documentary hypothesis. There are, though, a number of scholars, John H. Wenham, Robert Muntz, R. Albert Mohler, numerous who do uphold Mosaic authorship and lean more toward that plenary verbal inspiration that we talked about, that idea. So whichever side you fall on or anywhere in between there, you'll find some scholars that line up with you. So take heart. But not only read the folks who agree with you, it's good to sometimes read those who do not agree with you. As a matter of fact, I've learned more from folks who don't agree with me many times than I have from those who do agree with me. Anyway, Moses, though, is just a huge, dominant figure, and particularly here in Exodus through Deuteronomy, he is literally going to be almost every page. We'll have a lot of fun seeing him grow in his leadership. Now, Exodus begins. It begins with a new time, a new place. About 400 years have elapsed since the time of Joseph, and there are new folks in charge in Egypt. And they see this growing Hebrew population, which some 600,000 adults, perhaps as many as 2 million, some scholars estimate, and people in all. And they see them as a sizable threat. And so they begin to persecute them and treat them harshly. That's the background under which Exodus opens up. And then it speedily moves from the situation to, well, let's just say the deliverer, Moses, his birth, his younger years, very little told about those all together. His departure from Egypt, his time in the wilderness, and then his return at about the age of 80 to be the deliverer and the source of God's presence among the people, that he would come and say, here's what the Lord says, let my people go, Pharaoh. And so that is all a part of the Exodus story. Now, we might say, well, why is Exodus such a big deal? And you will come to the conclusion that it is if you read the Old Testament, because in the Psalms, the prophets, all throughout their history, they keep going back to this Exodus event and talking about God's deliverance at the Red Sea, and how he brought them out of slavery in Egypt. And you say, well, wow, why in the world do you just keep harping on that? Think of it kind of like this. Exodus is for Israel as a nation what the Declaration of Independence is for us here in America. I mean, we make a big deal out of 4th of July every year, right? The fireworks and picnics and the whole celebration. And it's because it is a foundational event for us and a time that we celebrate our independence, our freedom. That's the same thing that Israel's doing through the Exodus. And we can begin to appreciate it when we see it in terms of how we see our founding as a nation. Also, if you think about it, not long after our founding as a nation, we needed a set of laws, our Constitution, by which we govern ourselves. And if you see Israel going from Egypt and the Exodus event, the Declaration of Independence, to Mount Sinai, and then the giving of the Ten Commandments, think of that as their constitution, the bedrock of their law. You will begin to get a better appreciation, I think, for the nation of Israel and their excitement and their reverence for the person of Moses. At any rate, as you move along, you'll see that Exodus kind of falls into three sections, perhaps you could say. The Israelites in Egypt from chapter 1 through verse 36 of chapter 12, and then verse 37 of chapter 12 through 27 of chapter 18. The Israelites are in transition out of Egypt, moving in the wilderness toward Mount Sinai. And then chapter 19 to the end of the chapter is the Israelites at Sinai, the giving of the law and the subsequent things that happened there, including the golden calf incident and other things as well. Anyway, I hope you will follow the story of Moses from his birth all the way to his call. As a matter of fact, his call there in Exodus chapter 4 is a very important passage, and don't overlook that, particularly as it relates to the revelation of the covenant name of God. I am that I am, or I am who I am. I am. The tetragrammaton, YHWH. And we don't know exactly how it was pronounced. Most scholars would say that probably Yahweh is a good guess at that pronunciation. We don't know how it was pronounced because it was so sacred that the Israelites didn't pronounce it. Instead, they substituted the word meaning Lord, Adonai, in the Hebrew language. And so that Yahweh also sometimes is thought of as Jehovah, the personal name of God, the covenant name of God, and it's the name by which he reveals himself to Moses. You'll also notice that Moses wasn't a deliverer who was volunteering for the job. As a matter of fact, when God said, come on, Moses said, well, wait a minute, and let's think about this. There are 4 objections. Be sure that you know those. You'll want to know those for the test, and you'll learn a little bit about Moses in that. Then back as a deliverer with his brother Aaron, you'll see how as a team they work together, and they go and they confront Pharaoh. Particularly in that section, you'll read about the miracles or the plagues. And miracles are something that are very difficult to just in an objective type of way to discuss. Well, Why in the world is that? Well, because miracles are outside the realm of ordinary events. That's what miracle means. There's something that doesn't just naturally occur, and because this um, area of the miraculous, well, my goodness, uh, for us from 5,000 years later to look back and say, well, this is, and scrutinize it, it's very difficult. And so, about the best we can say is folks of faith and folks of science and folks of scholarship have a lot of different ideas and thoughts about the miracles of the Old Testament, particularly the events surrounding the Exodus, the plagues leading up to the departure of Israel from Egypt, and even the subsequent parting of the Red Sea, and all the other miraculous events along the way, the manna and the water from a rock, the pillar of fire by night, the cloud by day, all of these different miraculous occurrences. If you are looking for archaeological proof, if you're looking for other empirical data, you're probably going to be looking for a long time because folks have searched for that for a while. What we do have is the account here in Exodus. And so we have to accept it for what it is and approach it as a statement by the Israelites that they saw God at work in their situation and moving in a way that was miraculous. Anyway, that takes us all the way, if you will, to the Passover event, that final plague, the plague of the death of the firstborn. And that struck at the very heart not only of the nation of Israel, but it does it any parent. The thought of losing a firstborn, that's a horrific thought. And here we go. We have the Passover meal. Think of it. It is not only just a one-time meal and event, but it is to be a perpetual annual celebration. And we'll see it reflected in the New Testament as well. Well, if you take New Testament or read it later on, you'll see that in the gospel, particularly the celebration of the Passover. And you can mark that through all four of the gospels. The Israelites leave Egypt and they transverse across the desert to Sinai. And one of the cornerstone events there is the giving of the Ten Commandments, or as they're called in Hebrew, the 10 words. You'll note that the Ten Commandments see one moment, please. You'll see that the Ten Commandments, as they divide, basically speak about the Israelites' relationship with God, the first four commandments, pardon me, and then commandment number 5 through 6 about the Israelite and the social order, how they relate to people. You can think of it as both a horizontal and a vertical axis. The first 4 commandments horizontally, a person and their God. The next 6 horizontally, person to person. You'll also come across some terms there: apodictic law and casuistic law. Apodictic law are laws that are absolute. Thou shalt not kill. It's also like our speed limit signs: 55 miles an hour. Don't go any faster. And the casuistic law is case law. It's law that basically says, well, if this happens, then this is the consequences of it. There are examples of that throughout the law code. And while we're speaking of law code, you'll note that your textbook talks about the covenant code, which probably is Israel's oldest law code, but not the oldest in the ancient Near East. Those of you who remember your history will recall that the Code of Hammurabi is the world's oldest law code, or oldest known law code. This covenant code contains laws that are designed for a society that is basically agrarian and makes their living off the land, and they're herders and otherwise. And then there's the priestly code. The priestly code is concerned about proper worship. It talks about the ark and the tabernacle. As a matter of fact, the tabernacle is a awesome building. Have you just thought about the size of it? It's some 150 feet by about 75 feet, that outer tent. The entrance in through the tent is some 30 feet wide. In that courtyard inside the tent is the bronze altar of burnt offering. It's also the bronze basin where the water was kept for the ritual washings. And then there was the tabernacle itself inside this outer tent and tented courtyard. And it was divided into two parts. The holy place had the table of the bread of the presence, or the showbread table, and it had the golden lampstand, the 7-branched menorah, and it also had the altar of incense. It was this place, the holy place, where the priests did most of their work. And then set aside by a veil was the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place, and in it was the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was the top of it's called the mercy seat. The mercy seat will symbolize God's presence among the people. Once a year on the Day of Atonement, the high priest would enter in through the veil into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle blood on the mercy seat to make offering for the sins of the nation. Just a lot of nifty information in Exodus. Then Leviticus. Leviticus basically hinges on chapter 16, which is about the Day of Atonement. Chapters 1 through 7 provide instructions about the sacrifices, the offerings. Chapters 8 through 10 develop the process of ordination, both in general and specific terms, for Aaron and his sons and for the succeeding generations. Chapters 10 through 15 address the duties of the priest in respect to the lives of the people of Israel. And this 1 through 15 is that first section. 16 is the hinge. And then chapters 17 through 26 is understood as a cohesive body of law known as the Holiness Code. Now, a lot of times when we think of the word holy, we think about absence of sin, or perfect, or spotless, sinless. But holiness also has the connotation of being set apart or unique. And the Holiness Code is what makes Israel unique as a people, a unique people who worship a unique God. Leviticus, you'll have lots of fun reading through it. And there's also the Deuteronomic Code. The Deuteronomic Code basically is that law contained in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is a compound word, two Greek words, deuteros, two, or second, and nomos, law, the second law. And it's that law given to this second generation of Israelites who are preparing to go in to the Holy Land. Then you come to Numbers after Leviticus. Numbers is marked by the fact that there are two censuses that happen in it. The first census tells in Numbers chapter 1 tells us about all the folks who are coming out of Israel. And what does the second census tell us in Numbers 26? Well, it indeed tells us that those adults had died in the wilderness, just as the Lord proclaimed that they would for their disobedience there in Genesis 13, when they failed to go into the land because they were afraid and believed the report of the 10 spies rather than Caleb and Joshua, who said, "Sure thing, we can do this, rascal." As a matter of fact, the whole point of Numbers, other than the narrative portions that convey the story and help move it along, are that just this, that this generation, older generation, dies as God has decreed, and now the new generation is ready to go in, which brings us to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy basically is the farewell address of Moses. As a matter of fact, he begins by reviewing their history, how God brought them out of Egypt, and then the second law there about Deuteronomy chapter 5, restatement of the Ten Commandments for this new generation of people who are getting ready to go in and possess the land. And then he tells them about the blessings of obeying the law, the consequences of disobedience, and what will happen to them. Then he concludes with some words of farewell, and his death is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 34. And well, that's kind of a little whirlwind tour of chapter 4. Good luck as you study. God bless you, and I'll talk to you later, my friends.